Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Rose. And all throughout January, we've been looking at doing your own thing, contracting, freelancing, or going into business for yourself. So far, we've talked about getting into contracting for the first time and kind of what the experience is for contractors out there. We've also spoken with Rachel Andrews about how to manage your time when you do your own thing. Today, we're going to be talking about something very important. What happens when what you're doing doesn't work out? What happens when you change, start something new, or pivot? I'm here today with
Kim Crayton.
Kim, today we're going to be talking about sort of pivoting and changing directions when what you're doing doesn't work. So when you're working for yourself and you need to change your mind, abandon what you've been doing and start again. I believe you may have a background that's involved this.
Yes, I've made many pivots in my life. So to start with, I have a master's degree in training and development. So I started with working with learners of all ages. And I was working with young people in after school and summer programs and training the adults who work with them.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I started my teaching and learning and understanding about learning theory background. And then that was in Chicago. And then when I moved back to Atlanta, there was no structure after school setting. So I was like, okay, I'm qualified to teach. I never wanted to teach, but I was like, okay, I'm qualified to do this. I ended up in the school system. And the only thing that I can say that I'm happy about is because I got to see it from the inside out. Yeah, that's beneficial for me. I always am best when I can experience something and turn that learning into learning for others. So I became a certified special needs teacher, and I just really hated the system. I mean, there's a reason why it's not working, because it's broken, and there's nothing anyone can do at this point to fix it. It's like the tax code. People just keep pasting stuff on top of it. No one's thinking about maybe something we did 30 years ago doesn't work, so that whole thing. And so in 2014 was a major pivot. So I'm an only child, and my father passed away in August of 2014.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yes, thank you. And I've always been a person who was more than a consumer of tech, but never even thought of myself as a consumer of tech. No one in my community even talked about being a consumer. I never even thought that was possible for the average human to be a consumer of tech. I mean, a producer of tech. But when my father died, and as the only child, that was like my greatest fear. And when I didn't die, I went to Maui for a week and I sent back a text message. Yeah, I had to get away.
No. Like, self-care is care.
Yes, exactly. And so I had been to Maui once, and I knew it was a very spiritual place for me. Something about it. I was really centered the last time I was there. So I figured I'd go back. And when I was there, I sent back a text message. And I said to friends and family who would care, I said, I'm leaving education. I'm going into tech. And I put tech in quotes, because my next line was, when I figure that out, I'll let you know.
So you just had this idea, and you're like, this is where I'm going, and you made that jump.
Yeah, it wasn't even an idea. It was the thing of, I lived through what I thought would kill me. It hasn't. So show up now. It's time for you to show up in your world and stop going to a job that you hate, complaining about it. You've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. You always have entrepreneur ideas. Let's do something with this. And also, you've always had more than a user interest in technology. Let's figure this thing out. And so I just had, my father left me a little bit of money, so I was able to just explore, because I had no idea what tech really, again, no one in my community was talking about being a producer of technology. So when I went to my first conferences, the first conference I went to was literally when I had just come back from Maui. And at the time, it was called Southwire, and now it's Supernova South. And it's a conference that shows all the different technologies. So I was there like, oh, my God. Let me back up. I have an undergraduate in interior design.
Okay.
So when I was like, oh, my God, there's a thing called UX, UI. I didn't even know that. I was just like putting names to things. I was just like a kid in a candy store. And like my first JavaScript conference, I got a scholarship from my local Women Who Code chapter in Atlanta. I didn't even know what JavaScript was. I just went.
Nice.
I wasn't even a member of Women Who Code at the time. Something came up in my email and they had a scholarship and I applied for it and I got it. So it was like, I tell people when I talk, it's about, we really have to get to learn how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I was so uncomfortable in these situations, but they were so exciting to me because it was all very new. And so just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And everybody kept saying, oh, learn the code, learn the code. It's so easy. It's so easy. And so that was the next pivot, was learning to code.
Yeah.
Which was not so easy. And so that led.
Sorry, no, it's a common lie, isn't it? Be like, do this. It's not easy.
Yeah. And so that led to my first talk, though, which was overcoming the challenges of mentoring, and basically stop lying to newbies, because this shit's hard. Stop lying, because what you do is devalue the profession, and then learners who are being told that something is easy and they can't figure it out, they internalize it and think it's their issue when it's not. It's hard. So again, that was another pivot.
Yeah.
And then, and that was in 2016. So Scotland JS, when I met you, was my first conference talk.
And you've been doing quite a bit of conference speaking since then. For those of you unfamiliar with Kim's work, she's been keynoting all over the world. She's been headlining huge, fabulous conferences. It's pretty intimidating. I'm a bit of a fan.
Well, so it started in 2016. And then, again, my philosophy, I got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I ramped it up in 2017. And what I did was every Sunday, I sat down and I went on paper call or whatever and filled out a minimum of 10 CFPs.
Whoa.
Yeah, just filled them out. And so I got turned down way more than I got accepted. But what it turned out was I ended up doing in 2017, and this is not including local stuff that I did in Atlanta, but 19 conferences. I was in 3 countries and I did 5 keynotes.
That is intimidating and terrifying and glorious. So you went from a degree in interior design into training people for education, like training educators, into education. And then you, had a moment where you're like, this makes me miserable, tech, and then tried everything out, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I forgot to tell you that all during this, a few months before my father died, before I realized he had cancer, I had started a doctoral program.
As you do.
Yes, a doctor's in business administration, because I was not finding, as I said, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And there's a lot of information out there, as everybody knows. You can Google anything, but information is not knowledge. Information is just a whole bunch of data. But until you internalize it, which makes it knowledge, it means nothing. So I was having a hard time figuring out how to be an entrepreneur, how to build a business, because there's so much information out there, but it just wasn't clicking for me. So I decided to go the traditional route and get a degree in business administration. And when I started that program, I was undecided. It was only until I got into tech that I made my concentration technology entrepreneurship. And so I'll be finishing that program in August.
You're getting a PhD while doing all of this?
Well, it's a DBA,
Oh, sorry.
No, I want to clear this up because a PhD in management, and that is theory. So people getting PhDs are doing theory. They're creating theories. They're testing theories. They're, doing a lot of research.
Yeah.
A DBA is a practical degree, which is a Doctor's of Business Administration. So I take those theories that the PhDs have developed and honed, and I actually put them in real business applications and test them out.
That sounds like it might be a better fit for your do all the things approach.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. And so now I've been speaking about inclusion and diversity in tech. That's what most people started with, the mentoring. Then it moved into being given the title of community engineer, and then starting a podcast, the Community Engineering Report, and speaking about inclusion and diversity and keynoting about these issues. And because I'm a researcher and I'm pursuing a doctoral degree, I recognize that there's an issue. So my podcast, I did not want to, because of the climate that we currently have just globally on social media, and just in our inability to have very often tangible, constructive conversations. I was very intentional about making my podcast. Although it was about inclusion and diversity, I did not want it to be about morals or politics.
Okay.
And at that time, because I was in business school, I knew I had a different perspective than most people.
So what was the hook if it wasn't about this is the right thing to do?
It's about business and it's about economics.
Oh.
Yes. And people think, oh, well, Kim, that's kind of short-sighted, but it's not. It's the truth. And I am all about, if we're talking about white males who have privilege in this industry and many others, who are running the business entities. There are many out there who will do this because it feels good and that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But there are also many out there who will do it because it's good for their bottom line. And so once I get you to understand that it's good for ROI, and that's return on investment, then I can have a conversation with you about, hey, this is where you're screwing up. And this is how your intentions of improving inclusion and diversity are failing because you're not doing it this way. So I also have to recognize that I'm a Black woman from the South. When I enter many rooms, I am questioned of why I'm there. People may not say it, but they're thinking it. So when I come at you from business perspective, which I have a crap load of experience and background in, I'm getting a doctorate.
Yeah.
You can't argue with that. So when I put the information out there, when I show you the data, because I am a researcher, you can't argue with me on those moral or political things. So it just puts all of that. I don't get that emotional stuff. It puts it all, it takes all of that off the table. So I'm not going to debate with you about your morals and your politics. What I am going to do is have a constructive conversation with you about this is what the data shows. This is what you're doing. And this is why what you're doing is not working.
So it sounds very much like you're coming into a space that's been historically and currently hostile to people like you, unwelcoming, and you're coming in being incredibly well qualified in the space you're talking about, and you're bringing business solutions and not saying it's the right thing to do, even though hopefully everyone thinks it's the right thing to do, but say these are why you need to engage with diversity and inclusion for your bottom line.
Exactly. And for me, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really care if you think it's the right thing to do or not, because if you buy into the ROI part of this will be of benefit to your employers, your clients, your customers, your shareholders. So even if you don't buy into it, as long as you get out of the way and let these things happen, it benefits those people that will have to work with you.
So I think so far we've covered, I may have lost count, maybe a dozen pivots?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it's just like my last pivot my current pivot, I'm not going to say my last pivot, my current pivot, where I closed down the community engineering report. I'm no longer speaking exclusively about inclusion and diversity because I do not want to be the inclusion and diversity Black go-to girl. I want to talk about this and recognize that most of the conversations that we're having right now, whether it's take a knee, whether it's the sexual harassment, whether it's taking down these statues, whether it's, whatever it is, they're very reactive. And not much ever gets done when it's reactive because once the protesters are gone, people go back to their old habits. Once the spotlight is not on them anymore, they go back to their old habits. So I wanted to do something proactive. I'm a proactive person. My motto in life is, do I want to be right or do I want to be happy? And I want to be happy more times than not. And when I was doing inclusion and diversity, I was neither happy nor was I right. So I had to take that ownership on myself and say, you know what? It's not the community's responsibility to give me what I want. I know my value and I'm going to dictate to the industry what my value is. So I made a pivot, and the pivot that I'm making is business for social change. Some of you may have heard of benefit corporations in California and other states. They're called L3Cs.
And for our listeners who aren't based in the US, these are sort of businesses that are social enterprises wedded in.
Yes. And some of them are focused on social justice and social responsibility. But from my perspective, I'm looking at business as a social change. And I'm going to tell you why. Listeners, please watch Saving Capitalism. I don't care what country you're in. Watch Saving Capitalism by Robert Wright. He was the head of the Department of Labor during the Clinton administration. This is a fabulous documentary because it actually confirmed what I had been learning as I was doing my podcast. A lot of the reasons, as I said, these social movements aren't moving forward is because, again, I'm a very pragmatic person.
No, being practical is fantastic.
Social issues do not move the masses. That's just the bottom line. And in the United States, our government is no longer a vehicle for the people. The U.S. business runs our government. In this documentary, he outlines a document that is now referred to as the Powell Memorandum that was created in 1970 when the U.S. Chamber of Commerce commissioned a gentleman named Powell to give them suggestions on how to take not control of the government at that time. It was on the heels of of the civil rights movement, women's liberation, feminism, and they recognized that a lot of the populists were turning against business, and they wanted a way of figuring out how to change that narrative. And this document totally illustrates how lobbying became such a big thing, how the 1% will continue to be the 1%, and how there's so much I can say about this in this, and I don't have the time, but I'm actually doing a talk on this, because what Powell outlines in this document is the same thing I had been saying towards the end of as I was getting more and more frustrated with inclusion and diversity, about the lack of resources, the lack of authority, all these things that I was saying. He put in this document and told the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, this is how you move the needle on businesses having more power in the United States. And my suggestion is that we take those same tenets and use it for business for social change.
That's really exciting.
Yes, exactly.
So you're focusing on this business for... What's your business called again?
It's business. Well, my business is Kim Crayton, LLC. But this part is going to be a new business called Business for Social Change. And on the handles on Twitter and Instagram and on YouTube are BIZ, the number 4, social, and change is CHG.
Fantastic. And we'll link to these in the show notes for you, dear listener.
And what I'm doing is, first of all, I'm doing business coaching with... Particularly, I'm focusing on underrepresented and marginalized communities. Let me back up. Because of the business culture that we have, and this is not just in the U.S., this is globally, inclusion and diversity issues will not take hold until more people from underrepresented and marginalized communities are at the business table demanding change. And that's why so many of the things were frustrating me, because you can push from the bottom up, but if the top is not listening, you're wasting your energy. And so until we get more people with different perspectives at the business tables demanding to be heard, because now I have the ROI, I have the business background, I can compete with the companies that are ignoring inclusion and diversity, that's when change is going to happen.
So you've talked about a number of different very, very radical pivots you've made. Mm-hmm. You've gone from studying interior design to working for and in education. And then you just jumped into tech. You're public speaking, you're running podcasts, you've run podcasts, you're doing all of these things. And it can be maybe a little intimidating to chat to you in a very good way, because you've been so wonderfully and appropriately successful around such a number of different spaces. If we were talking to a specific dear listener, maybe the person who's listening right now, sitting on their couch, or perhaps miserable at work, who's been wanting to work for themselves, wanting to do their own thing, or they're doing their own thing and it's not quite working, what advice would you give for considering a pivot? How would you evaluate whether or not it's time for a change?
Well, I have 2 pieces of advice. And so the first one is, although it may seem intimidating to you, they all connect for me. So it wasn't until I made these further pivots, these current pivots, that the pieces started to come together. So I was feeling intimidated myself when all these things were happening. I did not see the connection. But if I look at the interior design part, it helped me develop a sense of, I'm a person who can see the forest and the trees of things. So I can see the macro and the micro. I can see symmetry and asymmetry. I can be very diplomatic. I can see beauty in things. So that has helped me cultivate where I am now. When I look at education and learning, if it wasn't for my education background and training, I wouldn't have questioned, why am I not getting this coding thing? And that wouldn't have pivoted me to start talking about it and educating people on how to mentor, because a lot of people don't understand how to mentor. But because I've worked with learners for so long, I know how to do that.
So it sounds like a really valuable piece of advice that I had never considered is that every time you change things up, every time you pivot, to be looking to your past, to be looking at what you've learned and to take those lessons with you.
Oh my God, yes. If you're not doing that, it will seem like you're wasting your time. We all have a plethora of knowledge in our bank. And the older you get, the more nuance that is. You get more hindsight. You get more of the macro vision. You can look back and say, okay, this thing connects to that. I can go back in my old journals and find stuff that I was talking about then that I really didn't understand. And now it's like, oh man, I was talking about this 10 years ago. Didn't even realize this.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Just understand that change, these pivots, they connect. And you just need to find out how they connect, because that is what is going to make you marketable in any field. So I tell people competitive advantage is two things. You can either compete on price, and who wants to do that? Because there's always somebody who can outbid you.
Yeah.
Or you can compete on differentiation. Your past, all your pivots are what differentiates you. So anybody can come in and talk about inclusion and diversity. Anybody can talk about, when I'm talking to my business clients, anybody, they can take your code base. They can take every single handbook you have. But if they don't understand how to put those things together, they can never compete with you. They can't copy you.
So fantastic. So every time you look to change, make sure you're bringing your whole self with you. Make sure you're bringing your past lessons. But at the same time, use everything you have to create your own voice,
Yes.
your own pitch, and be bringing something meaningful to business interactions.
Yes. And the second piece of advice I have is just get comfortable with pivoting. That is just the nature of what information economy is. So when we were in the industrial economy, our schools, everything was about train you with skills to get a job that you would keep, and you would grow into that job. It was all about explicit knowledge. You got there, they gave you a handbook that told you about HR, that told you about your benefits, that told you how to use that machine that you were working on, or whatever that thing was. They could write down your job. In the information economy, that is not what's happening. What is more valuable is tacit knowledge. And tacit knowledge is that knowledge that you gain from learned experience. So you take information, and this is why I say information is useless until it's turned into knowledge. You take information and you internalize it, you work with it, you practice it, you do whatever, and then that becomes your knowledge. So with how quickly things change now, how quickly things connect, how quickly, when people were talking about Google Glass and Apple Watch, people kept asking me, oh, Kim, is this a fad? It's a fad now, but the technology will catch up with what this is. So now surgeons are using Google Glass. When Apple launched Apple Watch, the iWatch, they started with 5 research projects. Now think about that for science. When you're usually doing a research study, if it's for diabetes, you could only have participants who were knowledgeable of that study, right? So that was people who knew about the researchers or whatever. Now you can get information data from global participants on a study. Does that not improve the data? So people need to be thinking about technology might start at a toy level, but it quickly turns into a tool level. And so you need to be able to pivot with that. You need to be able to look at the toy, figure out how to make it a tool. Look at the toy and figure out how to make it a tool. If you're developing, people get caught up in the language. The language is a tool. You need to figure out what problems you're trying to solve, because the language you may know does not solve their problem effectively. So pivot should be thought of as just a way of life, just like making mistakes and failure. It's just a part of how we do business in an information economy.
So a bit of a warning not to get too comfortable, that it might feel like, if this is your first big pivot, it might feel like you're taking a big run, making a big jump, changing, and this is the last time you'll change. But recognizing that in the way we live today, in our modern economy, in 5 years, you could be doing something completely different. In 10 years, you could be a firefighter.
In 2 years, you could be doing something completely different. Yeah. And embracing that. And so that's the scary part, because people don't like change. This is why organizational change is so hard. So when you're in the industrial economy, change happens so slowly that you can get people on board. Now change can happen quickly. And you need to if you don't have that kind of culture ingrained in your company, it could be detrimental, and you could be looking at, closing down because people aren't ready to change. Our bodies, our brains are designed for us to avoid change. It's about, just getting comfortable with change. And the people who embrace pivots are people who are going to succeed in this environment. Think about, let's give Amazon an example. So Amazon started as books on a very ugly website.
Oh, but the whole web was ugly back then.
But I'm just talking, that's just what it is. Okay, so that's what it was.
Yeah.
Everything was ugly. So it was a very ugly website. Now you look at what Amazon, they're selling everything you can think of. Not only are they selling everything, they have AWS, they have Whole Foods. Amazon is no longer a book company. Amazon is a logistics company. So what they can do now is whatever they choose to focus on, they can plug it into their system.
Yeah.
And they can only do that because they have a culture of experimentation and change. So that's a macro. So for a micro, which is you as the individual, you need to adopt that. You need to adopt that same philosophy for yourself.
This is fantastic advice. If I can go ahead and hopefully accurately recap some of the really fantastic advice you've given, it's to make sure you're bringing your whole self and all of your past experience with you every time you change. To get comfortable with change, that it's going to keep happening, you can't stop it. And on some level, maybe to make your peace with it, that this scary new feeling that's going to crop up every few years or even every few months isn't bad. It's what sort of your brain was designed to do. You're getting new exciting inputs to work with every time you have to change.
Yes. Yeah. And the ones that can master that are going to be, yeah. I mean, look at Elon Musk. He had something before PayPal, and you wouldn't think, why would he go into Tesla and then SpaceX? And how many of these rockets exploded before they could now go to the International Space Station?
It's been absolutely fantastic to have you, and thank you very much for your fantastic advice. One more time to round it up, where can people find you online?
Well, you can find me at kimcrayton.com. You can find me on Twitter at Kim Crayton1, and I'll spell my last name. It's Crayton. So KIMCRAYTON and the number 1. That's on Twitter and Instagram. And you can find B-I-Z, the number 4, social, CHG on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube.
And YouTube.
Yeah, because I'm doing a Biz for Social Change 365. So every day I'm doing a vlog where I'm explaining or I'm sharing my experience of building this business. So I'm being the example of how to build a business for social change.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. I'll be checking it out, and perhaps you, dear listener, will have a watch as well. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Pursuit Podcast. Join us back here next Tuesday when we're going to have another really exciting guest talking to us about another aspect of freelancing, contracting, or working for yourself.